Hey everyone, this is JR, and here is another one of Mike's mini history lessons. The last meal is an interesting American tradition for death row inmates. In many ways, it can be used to look into the true mindset of these inmates in their final moments and gauge their true feelings about themselves, their actions, and society at large. Here are some interesting last meal requests from U.S. history. James Edward Smith was convicted of murder after the fatal shooting of Larry D. Rojas during a robbery made at a cashier's office. Upon being asked what he wanted at his final meal, Smith asked for a lump of dirt. This was denied, because feeding a man dirt violates constitutional policy on cruel and unusual punishment, and Smith eventually settled for a single prison serving of yogurt. Either Smith truly felt he deserved the punishment awaiting him, or he went completely insane once he realized it was truly the end for him. Ronnie Lee Gardner was convicted of 2 counts of murder in 1985 and was executed by firing squad 25 years later in 2010. He was the first person to be executed by firing squad in the United States since the execution of John Albert Tyler 14 years earlier. His last meal of lobster tail, steak, vanilla ice cream, and apple pie was fairly standard. What wasn't standard was Gardner's specific request that he eat the meal while watching Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. William Bonin was convicted of the rape and murder of 21 boys and young men, and is suspected to have had a number of victims far in excess of that total. Bonin's final meal was substantial, consisting of 2 pepperoni pizzas and 3 helpings of chocolate ice cream. Apparently, Bonin wanted to die of overeating or a diabetic coma before the lethal injection, because he also consumed 18 servings of Coca-Cola and Pepsi before his execution. The murder trial of Philip Ray Workman was highly controversial, as several experts claim that the bullet that killed a police officer during Workman's attempted robbery of a Wendy's in Memphis could not have come from Workman's weapon. Despite this, Workman was convicted and executed by the state of Tennessee in 2007. Before his execution, Workman requested that his final meal be a large vegetarian pizza to be given to a homeless person. Officials denied the request. Workman refused to eat anything and was executed at 12:15 a.m. on May 9, 2007. Later that day, homeless shelters across Tennessee received massive numbers of vegetarian pizzas from people all over the country honoring Workman's last meal request. Johnathon Nobles was convicted for the murder of 2 young women in 1986. Before his execution by lethal injection in 1998, Nobles had seemingly become a devout Christian. For his final meal, Nobles requested the Eucharist, also known as Holy Communion, which consists of consecrated bread and wine. It was a plea to appease God before judgment. Ray Rector killed a man in a nightclub, shot a police officer who was attempting to negotiate a surrender, then shot himself in the head in a suicide attempt. Rather than killing him, however, the shot effectively lobotomized Rector, who was later convicted of the murders. Shortly before his execution, Rector requested a steak, fried chicken, cherry Kool-Aid, and a pecan pie. He left the pecan pie, jokingly informing the guard that he was saving it for later. Timothy McVeigh might have been a convicted terrorist and mass murderer responsible for the Oklahoma City bombing, but there's no denying that he knew exactly what he liked. Shortly before being executed by lethal injection by the state of Indiana, McVeigh requested a meal that consisted of just 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. Convicted of killing 2 victims during a botched robbery, Gerald Mitchell was executed by the state of Texas in 2001. It turns out that Mitchell, much like McVeigh, had a sweet tooth, as his only request for his final meal was a large bag of assorted Jolly Rancher sweets, although this also could have been an attempt to delay the inevitable, as it would take quite some time to finish the whole bag. Thomas Grasso was convicted for the strangulation of an 87-year-old woman at her home and an 81-year-old man just 6 months later as part of a series of home robberies. His final meal was an extravagant feast of 2 dozen steamed mussels, 2 dozen steamed clams, a cheeseburger, half a dozen spare ribs, 2 strawberry milkshakes, strawberries, half a pumpkin pie, and a can of SpaghettiOs. The prison, however, must not have been willing to splurge on the name brand because Grasso's last words were, quote, "I did not get my SpaghettiOs. I got spaghetti. I want the press to know this." End quote. Miguel Richardson was tried and convicted for the fatal shooting of 2 security guards in 1980 and executed by the state of Texas in 2001. Richardson made the rather romantic request for his final meal for a birthday cake with 2/23/90 written on top, which was the date he got married. He also specifically requested 7 pink candles, a lot of fruit, and a salad with Thousand Island dressing. Robert Boole was infamous for being convicted of the rape and murder of 11-year-old Krista Harrison. Shortly before being executed via lethal injection by the state of Ohio, Boole made an odd final meal request. While many of the entries in this lesson feature excessive plates filled with rich food, Boole only wanted a single, unpitted black olive. His reason for this was he hoped an olive tree, the symbol for peace, would sprout from his dead body. It didn't. Odell Barnes was a Texas man that was convicted of murdering Helen Bass in a home robbery. The later stages of Barnes' trial received heavy attention from anti-death penalty advocates and human rights groups primarily due to the deficiencies in the forensic evidence. Before his execution in 2000, Barnes requested justice, equality, and world peace for his final meal. Unfortunately, prison officials were unable to comply. Last, but not least, Lawrence Russell Brewer pretty much ruined the final meal for every death row inmate in Texas after his infamous request shortly before execution. After murdering James Byrd, Jr., a 49-year-old black man, by chaining his ankles to the back of his pickup truck and dragging him to death, Brewer was convicted and sentenced to death by lethal injection. When asked what he wanted for his last meal, Brewer requested a triple bacon cheeseburger, 2 chicken fried steaks with gravy and onions, a cheese and beef omelet, tomatoes, a meat lover's pizza, bell peppers, jalapenos, a bowl of okra, 1 pound of barbecue meat, half a loaf of bread, 3 fully loaded fajitas, 3 root beers, a pint of ice cream, and a slab of peanut butter fudge. Brewer's ridiculous request was granted, but when it came, he refused to eat a single bite, leading to the state of Texas ending the tradition of offering last meal requests. Some may argue that the last meal is a poor attempt to justify we are more civilized than the people we are putting to death, and that capital punishment is an antiquated way of dealing with criminals. Some argue that capital punishment is exactly what people like Lawrence Brewer deserve, but regardless of how you feel, one thing is for certain. Even the most heinous criminals can find new ways to surprise us, even at the very end. Or at least, that's the lesson you would get if Mike was your history teacher. Hey guys, thanks for listening. If you have any suggestions or topics for us to cover, email us at 4guysmedianetwork@gmail.com. If you're on the go, you can subscribe to our shows on iTunes. Be sure to check out our Patreon page, 4 Guys Media Network, for access to exclusive content like minisodes and more. We have a lot of goals to hit, so we can keep improving and continue providing more content ad-free. So all of your donations are greatly appreciated. Make sure you subscribe to the 4 Guys Media Network YouTube channel for all of our other projects by clicking the link on the right. And lastly, if you want to watch another episode, just click the link on the left. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.